For many, the image of Cindy Williams is frozen in a specific kind of amber: a 1950s Milwaukee basement apartment, a glass of milk and Pepsi, and the relentless rhythmic chant of Schlemiel, Schlemazel, that signaled the start of a Tuesday night ritual. She was Shirley Feeney, the sensible, sweater-clad optimist who served as the emotional heartbeat of a nation's favorite sitcom. Yet this television persona was only a thin veneer over a far more complex and disciplined artist who had already navigated the treacherous waters of New Hollywood. Before she was ever a household name, Cindy had proven her mettle in the cinematic trenches, working under legendary directors and alongside actors who would define a generation. She wasn't just a girl next door who happened to get lucky with a casting call. She was a meticulously trained performer who understood that comedy was a serious business. Her early work in films like American Graffiti and The Conversation showcased a woman capable of profound subtlety and dramatic weight, qualities she would later hide in plain sight behind Shirley's high-pitched giggles and wide-eyed sincerity. This foundation is essential to understanding the tragedy of her later career, as she treated her sitcom work not as a disposable paycheck, but as a craft that demanded respect, logic, and a certain level of artistic integrity that the industry wasn't always willing to provide. The meteoric rise of Laverne and Shirley in 1976 was a cultural phenomenon that few could have predicted, least of all the two women at its center. The show didn't just win its time slot, it became a dominant force that reshaped the landscape of American television. At its peak, it was the most-watched show in the country, attracting tens of millions of viewers who saw themselves reflected in the struggles of two blue-collar brewery workers. Cindy Williams brought a specific grounded humanity to Shirley that prevented the show from devolving into mere slapstick. She played the straight man with an internal life so vivid that even the most absurd physical comedy felt rooted in a recognizable reality. Behind the scenes, however, the sheer scale of this success began to create a pressure cooker environment. The industry saw a goldmine, but Cindy saw a grueling marathon that left little room for personal growth or professional boundaries. As the show's popularity grew, so did the demands on her time, her body, and her creative input. The transition from a promising actress to a corporate asset was swift and jarring, setting the stage for a conflict that would eventually dismantle the very world she helped build, proving that fame is often a gilded cage where the bars are made of ratings and network expectations. The chemistry between Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall was the primary engine that drove the show's success, a rare and lightning-in-a-bottle dynamic that appeared entirely effortless. To the public, they were the ultimate best friends, a sisterhood that transcended the script and offered a model of loyalty that many found deeply comforting. They complemented each other perfectly. Penny was the brash, impulsive Laverne, while Cindy was the cautious, romantic Shirley. This duality was the show's greatest strength, but it also became a point of friction as the production evolved. While the cameras were rolling, the bond was undeniable, but off-camera, the complexities of their partnership were exacerbated by the external pressures of the studio. Unlike many TV pairings, their relationship was genuine, rooted in years of friendship that predated the show, which made the eventual fractures all the more painful. Cindy often felt that she was fighting for the dignity of their characters, pushing back against writing that she felt made them look foolish or one-dimensional. She took her role as a co-lead seriously, perhaps more seriously than the producers liked, and this professional rigor was frequently misinterpreted as being difficult, a label that would follow her long after the final curtain call. The power structure on the set of Laverne and Shirley was uniquely complicated by familial ties, which added a layer of difficulty to Cindy's professional life that few other stars faced. With Gary Marshall at the helm, Penny's brother and one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, the lines between personal loyalty and professional management were often blurred. For Cindy, this meant navigating an environment where decisions were frequently made in a shorthand that she wasn't always privy to, or in a way that inherently favored the Marshall family dynamic. While Gary was undeniably a genius of the sitcom format, his loyalty was first and foremost to his sister, which often left Cindy feeling like an outsider in her own workplace. She wasn't just fighting for her character, she was often fighting for a seat at the table in a room where the rules seemed to shift without warning. This imbalance of power created a slow-simmering resentment that wasn't about ego, but about fairness and the right to have an equal say in the direction of a project she had spent years of her life building into a global brand. As the 1970s bled into the 1980s, the physical toll of the show began to manifest in Cindy's health and well-being. The style of comedy that made the show a hit was intensely physical, requiring pratfalls, choreographed chaos, and a level of energy that was exhausting to maintain over 24 episodes a season. For Cindy, who approached her work with the precision of a dancer, the lack of structure and the constant last-minute rewrites became a source of significant anxiety. She was a woman who valued preparation, yet she found herself in a production environment that thrived on spontaneity and at times sheer disorder. This clash of temperaments was not just a personality conflict, it was a fundamental disagreement about how art should be created. While the world saw a woman having the time of her life, Cindy was often internalizing the stress of a chaotic set, trying to maintain a facade of perkiness while her internal reserves were running dry. This disconnect between her public image and her private reality was the first crack in the foundation of her career at Paramount, a crack that would soon widen into a chasm. The arrival of musician Bill Hudson into Cindy's life marked a significant turning point, providing her with a support system outside the bubble of the television industry. For the first time, her world didn't revolve entirely around the soundstage, and this new perspective gave her the courage to start asking for the boundaries she had long lacked. Marriage and the prospect of a family changed her priorities, making the grueling 14-hour days and the lack of professional respect even harder to swallow. She began to see that the industry viewed her as a cog in a machine rather than a human being with a life of her own. This shift in her mindset was viewed by the studio as a threat to their bottom line, as they preferred their stars to be entirely devoted to the brand. Cindy's attempt to balance her personal happiness with her professional obligations was met with a coldness that shocked her, revealing the transactional nature of Hollywood fame. She was learning the hard way that when a star starts asking for a life, the studio often starts looking for a replacement. The narrative surrounding Cindy Williams has often been reduced to a simple story of a falling out or a diva moment, but the reality was far more nuanced and grounded in the systemic issues of the time. She was a woman operating in a male-dominated industry where the rules of engagement were written by and for men. When she stood her ground on creative issues or asked for basic professional courtesies, she was navigating a minefield of gendered expectations. Shirley Feeney was supposed to be sweet and compliant, and there was a subconscious expectation from the network that Cindy Williams should be the same. Her refusal to play that role off-camera was a radical act of self-preservation that the industry wasn't equipped to handle. This was the era before Me Too, before the recognition of toxic workplaces, and before the validation of women's voices in the writer's room. Cindy was, in many ways, an accidental pioneer fighting battles that would later become standard causes for actresses, but at the time, she was fighting them alone with no blueprint and no safety net. Despite the growing internal friction, the show remained a juggernaut, a testament to the sheer professionalism Cindy and Penny brought to their work. They were able to step onto the stage and deliver iconic performances even when the atmosphere behind the curtains was thick with tension. This ability to perform under duress is a hallmark of the great entertainers, but it also masked the severity of the situation from the fans to the audience. Laverne and Shirley were as close as ever, and their adventures remained as lighthearted as they were in the first season. This illusion was a credit to Cindy's skill as an actress, but it also contributed to the shock and confusion that would follow her departure. She was essentially a victim of her own success. She had made the character so lovable and the friendship so believable that people couldn't conceive of a world where it could all come crashing down over something as fundamental as a contract dispute or a life change. The internal scripts of the show also began to reflect the widening gap between Cindy's vision and the producers. As the show aged, it leaned more heavily into broader, more cartoonish humor, which Cindy felt undermined the emotional core of the characters. She believed that Shirley Feeney deserved to grow up, to experience real stakes, and to move beyond the repetitive beats of slapstick. Her advocacy for the character's maturity was often seen as a hindrance to the "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" mentality of the network. This creative stagnation was a source of deep frustration for an actress of her caliber. She felt the walls closing in, both physically on the set and creatively in the writer's room. It was becoming increasingly clear that the version of Shirley the studio wanted was no longer a version Cindy felt she could authentically inhabit, setting the stage for a final confrontation that would change the course of her life forever. The culmination of these factors, the power imbalances, the physical exhaustion, the creative differences, and the shift in personal priorities, created a perfect storm of professional discontent. Cindy Williams was standing at the edge of a precipice, carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar franchise on her shoulders while feeling increasingly invisible as an individual. She had given years of her life to a character that the world adored, but she was finding that the world's adoration didn't translate into basic dignity at her place of employment. The irony was that the very optimism she projected as Shirley was being tested in her real life, as she searched for a way to maintain her integrity in a system that seemed designed to strip it away. Part 1 of her story ends not with a whimper but with the gathering clouds of a storm that would eventually break the sitcom world in half, leaving a void that would never quite be filled. Throughout this period, Cindy maintained a level of poise that was almost superhuman. She never let the cracks show in interviews, and she continued to be a champion for the show in the public eye. This loyalty, however, was not reciprocated in the way she expected. She was beginning to realize that the family atmosphere the Marshalls promoted was a conditional one, dependent on her compliance and her silence. The realization that she was an employee first and a friend second was a bitter pill to swallow for someone who valued connection as much as Cindy did. She was learning that in the high-stakes world of 1980s television, there was no room for the kind of friendship-fixing anything idealism that her show preached every week. This disillusionment would eventually become the catalyst for the most difficult decision of her career. The scripts of Laverne and Shirley Asterisk often centered on the duo overcoming insurmountable odds through grit and humor. In reality, Cindy was facing her own set of insurmountable odds that no amount of humor could fix. She was navigating a corporate culture that viewed her as a replaceable part in a lucrative engine. The disconnect between the working-class hero status of her character and her own experience as a mistreated worker was a surreal experience. She was the face of the working woman, yet she was being denied the very rights and respect that her character would have fought for in a heartbeat. This irony was not lost on her, and it served to strengthen her resolve as the situation reached its breaking point. The pressure of maintaining the perfect image also took a toll on her relationship with Penny Marshall. While they tried to remain a united front, the stress of the production naturally bled into their personal interactions. They were two women in an impossible situation, pitted against each other by a system that thrived on conflict and competition. The narrative of the catfight was a popular one in the tabloids of the time, and while it was largely an exaggeration, the seeds of genuine distance were being sown. They were drifting apart not because they didn't care for each other, but because the environment they worked in made it impossible to stay close. As the seventh season approached, Cindy Williams was a woman seeking an exit strategy, though she didn't know it yet. She was looking for a sign that things could change, that she could find a way to stay on the show while also being treated with the respect she had earned. She wasn't looking for a fight, she was looking for a future. However, the industry's response to her quiet requests for change was to tighten the screws, believing that she had nowhere else to go. They underestimated the strength of her convictions and the depth of her resolve. The fans, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil. They continued to send letters, buy merchandise, and tune in by the millions, oblivious to the fact that the woman they loved was reaching her breaking point. This massive public support was a double-edged sword for Cindy. It provided her with a sense of purpose, but it also made the thought of leaving even more terrifying. How do you walk away from a role that means so much to so many people? How do you explain that the laughter you're providing is costing you your peace of mind? Cindy's background in theater and film provided her with a perspective that many television stars lacked. She knew there was a world outside the three-camera sitcom setup. She knew she had talent that didn't rely on funny voices or physical gags. This knowledge gave her a quiet confidence, even as the walls of the studio seemed to be closing in. She was a serious actress who happened to be in a sitcom, not a sitcom star who hoped to be an actress. This distinction was vital to her sense of self and would eventually guide her through the dark days that were coming. The final months of her regular tenure on the show were marked by a sense of impending finality. There was a feeling in the air that the status quo could not be maintained. The joy had largely vanished from the process, replaced by a grim determination to get through the day. The hopeless voice mentioned in the prompt was becoming more of a reality behind the scenes, as Cindy realized that the people she had trusted were not who she thought they were. The betrayal she felt was not just professional, it was deeply personal, cutting to the core of her beliefs about loyalty and teamwork. In the midst of this, her personal life offered a brief respite. Her marriage to Bill Hudson was, in its early stages, a source of genuine happiness and a reminder that there was more to life than NOTZ. However, even this happiness would soon be complicated by the very career she was struggling to manage. The demands of the show were so pervasive that they threatened to consume everything in their path, leaving no room for the very life she was trying to build. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary in the annals of television history. It wasn't just about a contract or a salary, it was about the fundamental rights of a woman in the workplace. It was about whether a star could also be a mother, and whether a corporation had the right to own every second of an individual's life. Cindy Williams was about to become the face of a different kind of struggle, one that would have lasting implications for generations of performers to follow. As we look back at this first chapter of her journey, we see a woman who was much more than the character she played. We see an artist of depth, a worker of discipline, and a human being of immense integrity. The image of Shirley Feeney may have been what the world fell in love with, but the reality of Cindy Williams is what truly deserves our respect. She was a woman who was about to lose everything she had worked for in order to save the one thing that mattered most, her dignity. Part 2, The Fracture and the Fallout. The breaking point arrived in the form of a miracle that the studio treated like a catastrophe. When Cindy Williams discovered she was pregnant in 1982, it should have been the happiest chapter of her life, a fulfillment of the personal dreams she had nurtured alongside her professional ones. Instead, the news was met with a level of corporate hostility that is difficult to fathom by modern standards. At the time, Laverne and Shirley Asterisk was entering its 8th season, and the production machine was geared for maximum output. The idea that its female lead would require a change in schedule, physical accommodations, or heaven forbid, time off to give birth was treated not as a natural human event, but as a breach of contract. Cindy, ever the professional, approached the studio with transparency and a willingness to work out a solution. She believed that her years of loyalty and the massive profits she had helped generate would entitle her to a modicum of human decency. She was wrong. The studio's response was to present her with a revised contract that was, in her eyes, both medically dangerous and deeply insulting, demanding she work up until her actual due date with no concessions for her physical state. The ensuing legal and professional battle was not a spat between actresses, as some tabloids tried to frame it, but a foundational conflict between a worker and a corporate entity. Cindy was asked to perform physically demanding stunts and endure grueling hours that her doctors advised against. When she stood her ground, the environment on set turned toxic. She found herself increasingly isolated, with the production moving forward as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a partner to be respected. The psychological toll of being treated as an inconvenience while carrying her first child was immense. This was the betrayal she carried quietly for years, the realization that the family at Paramount was willing to jeopardize her health and the health of her unborn child for the sake of an episode count. It was a cold, calculated move that shattered her perception of the industry and her place within it. Her abrupt departure from the show remains one of the most jarring moments in sitcom history. One week Shirley Feeney was there, and the next she was gone, explained away with a clumsy plot point about moving away to be with her husband. There was no grand farewell, no retrospective, and no respect given to the character that had anchored the show for nearly a decade. For Cindy, the exit was a relief, but it was also a profound trauma. She was essentially erased from her own success story. The lawsuit she filed for $20 million was a necessary act of defiance, a way to reclaim her agency after being told she had none. While the suit was eventually settled, the reputational damage in the insular world of Hollywood was already done. She was labeled difficult and litigious, labels that are often weaponized against women who dare to demand fair treatment. The momentum of her career, which should have been at its peak, was suddenly and violently halted. In the aftermath of the settlement, Cindy found herself in a strange kind of exile. She had the financial security from her years of success, but the professional landscape had shifted beneath her feet. The phone didn't ring with the same frequency or for the same kinds of roles. She had been the most famous woman on television, and now she was a cautionary tale. This period of her life required a different kind of strength, the strength to endure the silence. She focused on motherhood, finding in her children the purpose that the industry had tried to strip away. However, the creative fire within her didn't go out, it just had to find new ways to burn. She moved into theater and smaller independent projects, rediscovering the joy of acting without the suffocating pressure of a network juggernaut. It was a period of rebuilding, of learning who Cindy Williams was when she wasn't Shirley Feeney. The public, however, never quite let go of Shirley. Everywhere she went, she was met with the echoes of her past. This was a double-edged sword. While she appreciated the love from fans, it was a constant reminder of the career that had been prematurely truncated. She handled this with a grace that few could manage, never appearing bitter or resentful in public. She understood that for the audience, the show was a source of pure joy, and she didn't want to tarnish that for them. This self-imposed silence about the true nature of her departure was a heavy burden to carry. She was protecting the legacy of a show that hadn't protected her. It was a profound act of generosity, but one that came at a significant personal cost to her own sense of truth and justice. During this time, the industry was slowly beginning to change, partly because of the stand she had taken. While she wasn't a vocal activist in the traditional sense, her legal battle sent shockwaves through the studios. Other actresses began to look at their contracts more closely, and the conversation around pregnancy in the workplace began to shift from a problem to a right. Cindy may not have set out to be a pioneer for labor rights in Hollywood, but by refusing to be bullied, she paved the way for those who came after her. The irony is that the very difficulty she was accused of was actually the integrity that the industry so desperately needed. She was a woman ahead of her time, fighting for a world that wouldn't fully arrive for another few decades. Her personal life during these years was also a landscape of quiet endurance. Her marriage to Bill Hudson eventually came to an end, another loss she navigated with characteristic privacy. She was a woman who had learned early on that the world preferred her smiling and upbeat, and she seemed to internalize that expectation even in her private struggles. The hopeful voice of Shirley Feeney became a mask she wore to navigate the complexities of her own life. Friends described her as incredibly funny and sharp, a woman who used humor as both a bridge to others and a shield for herself. She was a survivor of the Hollywood machine, and she carried the scars of that survival with a quiet dignity that was often mistaken for contentment. The 1990s and early 2000s saw her return to the stage in a big way, with successful runs in national tour and on Broadway. Theater offered her a level of respect and creative control that she found deeply healing. In the live environment, she wasn't a commodity to be edited or managed. She was a performer in direct conversation with her audience. This period was a creative renaissance for her, proving that her talent wasn't tied to a specific character or a specific era. She was an actress of range and stamina, capable of carrying a show on her own terms. These years were some of her most rewarding as she finally felt seen for her skill rather than just her fame. Despite her professional recovery, the medical crisis mentioned in the prompt cast a long shadow over her later years. The complications from a weight loss procedure led to a terrifying brush with death that few knew about at the time. Septic shock is a brutal, fast-acting killer, and the fact that she survived it was nothing short of a miracle. The recovery was long and arduous, involving memory loss and physical therapy that tested her resolve to its limits. This experience changed her relationship with her own body and her perspective on life. She realized how fragile everything truly was, and it gave her a new sense of urgency regarding her own story. The woman who had been silent for so long began to feel the need to speak. This medical ordeal also highlighted the hidden pressures that actresses face regarding their appearance. The fact that she felt the need for such a procedure in the first place speaks to the relentless scrutiny that women in the public eye endure, regardless of their age or accomplishments. Cindy was a victim of the same beauty standards that she had helped to define in her youth. Her battle with sepsis was not just a medical emergency, it was a physical manifestation of the stress and expectations that had been placed on her for decades. Surviving it gave her a second chance not just at life but at truth. It was during her recovery that she began to piece together the narrative of her life, preparing to finally share the reality behind the laughter. The reconciliation with Penny Marshall in their later years was a significant moment of closure for both women. They had both been through the fire of fame and come out the other side, and they realized that their bond was more important than the conflicts of their youth. They began appearing together at fan conventions and in commercials, leaning into the nostalgia with a genuine affection that moved their fans to tears. This wasn't just a marketing move, it was a genuine healing of a relationship that had been fractured by forces beyond their control. They were two survivors who finally found their way back to each other, acknowledging that they were the only two people in the world who truly understood what those years in the spotlight were like. As she entered her 70s, Cindy Williams was a woman of profound clarity. She had navigated the heights of fame, the depths of a legal battle, the challenges of motherhood and divorce, and a life-threatening illness. She had come through it all with her humor and her humanity intact. She was no longer afraid of the labels that had once been used to diminish her. She was a woman who knew her worth, and she was ready to tell her story on her own terms. The truth she finally allowed to surface was not a collection of scandals, but a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of self-respect. The memoir she eventually wrote was a gift to her fans and a final act of self-reclamation. In its pages, she laid out the reality of the set of Laverne and Shirley Asterisk, the heartbreak of her departure, and the long road back to herself. It was a book filled with wit and warmth, but also with a searing honesty that caught many by surprise. She wasn't seeking revenge, she was seeking understanding. She wanted people to know that behind the smile was a woman who had fought hard for every inch of ground she held. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the revelation that the cultural anchor of the 70s was a woman of immense strength and hidden depth. Her work as an advocate for sepsis awareness in her final years was another example of her turning her private pain into public good. She spoke candidly about her experience, warning others of the signs and symptoms that had nearly claimed her life. This was the true Cindy Williams, a woman who, even in her vulnerability, was looking for a way to help others. She was using her platform not for vanity but for service, a fitting final act for a woman who had spent her life bringing joy to others. The legacy she was building in these final years was one of authenticity. She was stripping away the layers of Shirley and allowing the world to see Cindy. It was a vulnerable process, but one that she embraced with courage. She was no longer defined by the expectations of a network or the demands of a studio. She was a woman who had survived the best and worst of Hollywood and had come out the other side with her soul intact. This was what many had long suspected, that she was a far more formidable and complex person than her sitcom persona ever allowed her to be. The quiet weight of her passing was felt so deeply because she had been a constant in the lives of so many. For decades, she had been a symbol of friendship and hope, and even as the truth of her struggles emerged, that didn't change. If anything, knowing what she had endured only made her more relatable and more beloved. She wasn't a perfect icon, she was a real person who had faced real challenges and kept going. This is the part of her story that stays with people, the realization that even those who make us laugh are often carrying burdens we can't imagine. In the end, Cindy Williams proved that you can lose your career and still win your life. She lost the show that made her famous, but she kept her dignity, her family, and her truth. She showed that the choices that cost her more than the public ever realized were also the choices that saved her. She refused to sacrifice her health or her principles for a paycheck, and while the industry punished her for it, history has vindicated her. She is remembered not just as a sitcom star, but as a woman of substance who knew when to walk away. As we move into the final part of her story, we look at what remains after the cameras stop rolling and the applause fades. We look at the lasting impact of a life lived with integrity and the enduring power of a story told truthfully. Cindy Williams was a woman who made America believe in friendship, but her real gift was showing us the courage it takes to be true to oneself. Her story is a reminder that the most important role we ever play is the one where we are simply ourselves. The final years of her life were a testament to the fact that it is never too late to reclaim your narrative. She allowed the truth to surface not out of bitterness but out of a desire for wholeness. She wanted the world to see the full picture, the light and the shadow. And in doing so, she became more than just a television character. She became a human being whose story continues to inspire and resonate. The image America fell in love with was just the beginning. The woman behind it was the real masterpiece. As the curtain begins to fall on this reflection of her life, we are left with a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the laughter she gave us, the battles she fought for us, and the honesty she shared with us. Cindy Williams was a rare talent and an even rarer soul, a woman who understood that the true cost of success is only too high if it costs you your soul. She kept hers, and in doing so, she gave us a legacy that will never fade. Part 3, The Enduring Echo of a Truth Told Late. The passing of Cindy Williams in early 2023 was not just the loss of a television star. It was the closing of a door on an era of entertainment that felt more tactile, more human, and perhaps more innocent than our own. When her family released the statement about her peaceful departure, the world paused to remember not just the actress, but the era she represented. The tributes that poured in from every corner of the globe were a testament to the cultural anchor she had become. People shared stories of watching her with their grandmothers, of finding comfort in her voice during difficult times, and of the way she and Penny Marshall had paved the way for female friendship on screen. But beneath the nostalgia, there was a new layer of respect, informed by the truths she had shared in her final years. We were mourning the woman we thought we knew, but also honoring the woman she actually was, a survivor of an industry that often breaks the very people it celebrates. Her legacy is one of profound resilience, a word that is often overused but in her case is entirely accurate. She didn't just survive the fallout of her departure from Laverne and Shirley Asterisk, she thrived in spite of it. She showed that there is life after the big break ends and that success is not a straight line but a series of peaks and valleys. By moving into theater and taking on diverse roles later in life, she proved that her talent was not a product of a specific time or place, but a fundamental part of her being. This part of her story is incredibly empowering for anyone who has faced a professional setback or been told they are past their prime. Cindy Williams didn't accept the industry's expiration date for her career, she simply changed the venue. The underrated label that surfaced after her death is perhaps the most fitting tribute to her skill. For years, she was so good at being Shirley Feeney that people forgot she was acting. The precision of her comic timing, the depth of her emotional reactions, and the physical control she maintained in every scene were all the hallmarks of a master craftswoman. In her films, we see a different kind of brilliance, a quiet, watchful intelligence that could hold the screen against some of the greatest actors of all time. It is only in looking back at her entire body of work that we see the true scale of her ability. She was a dramatic actress who mastered comedy, a rare feat that requires a level of empathy and timing that few possess. The impact of her legal battle regarding her pregnancy continues to be felt in the industry today. While the lawsuit was a personal hardship at the time, it became a landmark moment for women's rights in the workplace. Today, when we see actresses working through their pregnancies or being given the accommodations they need to balance motherhood and career, we are seeing the fruit of the seeds Cindy Williams planted decades ago. She paid a high price for that progress, losing the momentum of her superstardom, but the legacy of her defiance is far more valuable than any number of seasons she could have stayed on the show. She proved that dignity is not negotiable and that some things are worth more than a contract. Her survival of septic shock in her later years added a layer of profound vulnerability to her public persona. When she spoke about the memory loss and the physical struggle of recovery, she was breaking the final taboo of the perfect star. She was showing us that her body was as fallible as ours, and that her strength was not about being unbreakable, but about how she put herself back together. This honesty made her more than just a celebrity, it made her a companion in the human experience. Her advocacy for sepsis awareness likely saved lives, turning her private near-death experience into a public service. This was the ultimate evolution of the hopeful voice America fell in love with, a voice that was now used to speak truth to power and offer help to the suffering. The final reconciliation with Penny Marshall serves as a beautiful coda to their shared story. In an industry that loves to pit women against each other, their ability to find their way back to a place of mutual respect and love was a radical act. It showed that the bond they created on screen was based on something real. Something that even the most toxic production environment couldn't fully destroy. Their later appearances together were a gift to the fans, but more importantly, they were a gift to themselves. They were two women who had navigated the storm together and finally reached a calm harbor, acknowledging that despite everything, they were better together than apart. Looking back, we can see that Cindy Williams was a woman who lived her life with a remarkable degree of intentionality. She made choices that were difficult and often misunderstood, but they were always her choices. Whether it was walking away from a hit show to protect her dignity or choosing to speak honestly about her health later in life, she was the architect of her own narrative. She refused to be a victim of her circumstances, choosing instead to be the hero of her own story. This is the truth that surfaced near the end, that she was never the fragile girl next door. She was a woman of steel who just happened to have a very warm smile. The silence she kept for so many years wasn't out of weakness, but out of a desire to protect the joy she had created for others. She understood the power of the image she had built, and she didn't want to tarnish it with the messy reality of the industry. However, her decision to finally speak was equally important. It gave permission to others to tell their own truths, to acknowledge their own struggles, and to stop pretending that everything is perfect. Her memoir and her late-life interviews are essential documents for anyone trying to understand the reality of fame and the cost of integrity. What remains of Cindy Williams is not just the reruns and the movie clips, but a feeling. It's the feeling of knowing that someone was on your side, that friendship is a force for good, and that truth eventually finds its way to the light. She was a woman who carried the weight of a nation's expectations with grace, even when the weight was almost too much to bear. Her story is a reminder that we never truly know what someone is going through behind the scenes, and that kindness and respect are the most important things we can offer each other. Did Cindy Williams deserve better? The answer is an unqualified yes. She deserved a studio that valued her humanity as much as her ratings. She deserved a career that continued to grow at the pace of her talent. She deserved to have her pregnancy treated as a joy rather than a liability. But the fact that she didn't get what she deserved only makes what she achieved all the more impressive. She built a beautiful life and a lasting legacy on her own terms in spite of the obstacles placed in her path. She took the bitter of her betrayal and turned it into the better of her character. The part of her story that stays with me the most is her quiet endurance. We live in a world that celebrates the loud, the dramatic, and the confrontational. Cindy Williams showed us a different kind of strength, the strength of the woman who shows up, does the work, and holds her head high even when the world is being unfair. Her resilience wasn't a shout, it was a steady, rhythmic pulse that kept her going through the dark times. It was the same rhythm as that opening theme song, a stubborn refusal to stop moving forward. As we conclude this reflection, we are left with the image of a woman who finally allowed herself to be fully seen. The truth she revealed confirmed what we always felt, that she was a person of immense heart and incredible spirit. She was the woman who made us believe friendship could fix anything, and in the end, she proved that honesty and time can fix almost anything else. She is gone now, but the laughter remains, and more importantly, the truth remains. And that is a legacy worth celebrating. Cindy's journey reminds us that the most watched television series in the country is just a footnote in the story of a human life. What matters more are the connections we make, the principles we uphold, and the honesty we bring to our own lives. She was a star, yes, but she was